Can you just talk to us about what was going through your head as you were walking those 2 blocks and walked into that school on that fateful day of September the 4th, 1957?
Well, Sherri, I would say that it was not fear, but more determination. And I guess a lot of that came from the fact that the conversation I had had with my parents prior to my going that morning. We had breakfast, we sat at the table, we talked about what the day might look like. But because my parents did not want me to walk into a sea of fear, they did not share with me some of the things that had happened that prior to that morning. So when we got to the entrance of Cedar Street, which is 2 blocks from Harding, the street was barricaded. And of course, as you saw in the picture, the streets were lined with students as well as adults. So therefore, my father could not drive me to the entrance to the school, and I had to get out and walk those 2 blocks. But what I remember him saying to me was to hold your head up high, be proud of who you are. You are inferior to no one, and you can do whatever you want to do. So that is what I carried with me. I held my head up high and walked in what I always say, I kept my eyes on the door because I felt that if I could get inside, then everything would be all right. So it was more of a determination than anything else.
I really appreciate that what you shared, because again, I think it really does speak to what courage, and you hear a lot, especially over these last couple of years after George Floyd's murder, you hear people doing courageous conversations. And it does take courage. And sometimes, I sort of give a side eye to that because it's like, we should just do what's right. And yet doing what's right isn't always easy, and it takes courage. Talk a little bit more, Dot, about how you and your family were engaged. Tell our league members a little bit more about your incredible father and his engagement at Smith and the community and those community leaders.
Well, of course, as you know, my father was a professor at Johnson C. Smith University, and also my father was a Presbyterian minister and very much engaged in the community in which we lived in. I grew up on the campus of Johnson C. Smith University. So as I tell people, from a very early age, I was surrounded by education. But he was also involved in the community too as well. And as Linda mentioned earlier, the NAACP was very active in what happened as far as integration moving forward after Brown. So in Charlotte, the late Kelly Alexander was president of the NAACP. Reginald Hawkins, who was a friend of my father's and lived in our community, was also very active, as well as Attorney White. And so they would have these conversations. Back then, you couldn't get together and have conversations like we do now, but they had the conversations in our homes, across the dinner table, and talked about what kinds of things that they were going to do. Well, first of all, at 1957, that's 3 years after Brown, and nothing had been done in Charlotte. And so they decided it was time for Charlotte to test the system. So they reached out to 20 families in Charlotte. Of course, my family being one, there were 3 of us that were still in public school. And of course, of the 20 families that they reached out, only 5 families, and they submitted application, but the school system only accepted 5 families. Out of those 5 families, then it ended up being 4 children, and which was 3 families, but 4 children. And so that's how it all got started. Right.
Sherri, you know how we do in communication. I'm going to add something. Dot, over the years, and I probably have asked you this, talk more about that dress. In that black and white photo with that bow, who made that dress? Because, you know, in my mind, that dress was part of that determination. So talk about that.
That dress was made by my grandmother, my father's mother, and she was a seamstress. And every year from the time I went to school, my grandmother made me a new dress to wear to school. So, and I tell people that I have that in my home today. I have that sewing machine. It's an old sewing machine with a pedal. And as a child growing up, when I'd go visit my grandmother during the summer, I'd sit on the floor and she'd let me pedal it with my hand. So of course that dress was important to me. And because she made it, but she wanted to make sure, as other years as well, but she wanted to make sure that I had a special dress to wear that day.
You know, we're looking at some of those images, and as we look at, as the league even has had these conversations, and as Linda said, after the death of George Floyd, you see these images of protest then, you see those same images of protest now, and sometimes it's very easy to be a little bit disheartened. But can you tell me how you have seen positive change in Charlotte over your lifetime? Because you've been here, you've been to New York and a couple of places, but you've just been a Charlottean your whole life. So what have you seen? What's different? And maybe what are some of the things that are the same?
Well, of course, I moved back to Charlotte in 1968. And that was the beginning of the early stages of busing and integration in CMS. And through the years, I saw CMS become a world-class school system. I have 2 children, as Linda mentioned, and I was fortunate that my children were able to be a part of that growing up. So I saw good things for children during those days. The other thing is that I saw the growth that was happening in Charlotte. As we see today, Charlotte was changing globally. When I came along, it was more black and white. But then I began to see that the people were moving to Charlotte from all over the world. The other thing that I saw was transition. Transition. I live right across the street from Johnson C. Smith University, and the community in which I lived in has changed drastically. People say gentrification, I say transition, because the community is going through a big transition in terms of people moving into the community that I currently live in that don't look like me. And what I say is that's okay. I have no problem with that. But at the same time, the only thing that I want to, in the change of the community, Sherri, is to embrace new people moving in our community, but I don't want to lose our rich history. So that's another thing that I work on, and you know that, and that I fight for. The other thing that I have noticed over the years living here in Charlotte is the conversations that we have had around diversity and inclusion. We continue to have those conversations. Some of those conversations are rich. I'm not saying that we don't need to have more of those conversations, but that's one of the things is a lot different than it was when I first came back here in 1968. And then, of course, the other is I've seen the political arena change in terms of our mayor being a female, but not only in the mayor's role, I've also seen that in other roles in Charlotte as well. And then we look at our city council, and we have young people on our city council, the millenniums. So all of that, I have seen that the growth, but all those changes take place for a better community.
You know, one thing I want to make sure that people know is that you are, as always, being modest, humble, and gracious. Ms. Dot, as we call her, serves on something that we have here on the West Side, headed up at Johnson C. Smith University. It's called the Indaba, which is after a South African word for the community gathering together. And there's a leadership group of that called the Council of Elders. And she is the statesperson, the spokesperson, the elder stateswoman of that Council of Elders. And one thing that I want everyone to know is that when this woman speaks, we listen. And you can hear why. She has really been and continues to be a voice for her community where she lives here in the West Side, and the entire city is listening to her.
Thank you, Sherri.
Dot, as you know about the Junior League and you've worked with the organization, and what are the things that each generation of league members need to keep in mind? How do we stay current? How do we be authentic? You know, again, a lot of what you talked about are key parameters of programs from the league over the years. And yet we're also operating in this world of COVID protocols and having to do things differently. So what advice would you have for the league as we think about how we can just continue to be relevant?
Well, I think one of the things is if you keep abreast as to what's going on and you know, in the city, there's so many things that are going on right now where you can be of a lot of help. Both you and Sherri know that I have a passion for education, especially for our children. And right now, our children are really going through a very, very hard time. A lot of it has had to do with the pandemic, but at the same token, a lot of these children that I advocate for were children that were behind even before the pandemic and are getting further and further behind. I've always said, I don't care where a child comes from, a child can be successful. So we need to look at ways that we can help those children to be able to be successful in this world. One of the things that Sherri talked about, my work on the West Side, one of the things that I have done over the last couple of years is I have looked at the schools on the West Side. And I wrote a proposal to my church and also to the Charlotte Area Fund to adopt 2 of the elementary schools. One is Bruns Elementary School, which is one of the lowest performing schools in Mecklenburg, but also in the state of North Carolina, right here in our city. And I'm sure a lot of you are probably not aware of that. The other is University Park Arts Academy. My feeling was that if we adopt these 2 schools, they're both K-5 schools, and if we adopt and work with the students and the teachers and the administration at these schools, that if we start with them at a young age, hopefully by the time these kids get into high school, that they won't have to struggle as hard as some of the kids would have to. So that's one of the things. So these are 2 things that I'm saying to you all, that think in terms of maybe not necessarily these 2 schools, but think of schools across CMS. There are 46 schools across CMS that are going through a lot of struggles right now. So maybe it could be a school in your neighborhood, or maybe, but if not, it doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot reach out to those schools and find out what is it that we can do? Some groups have chosen to do high school students. I chose elementary school because I think that's where it starts. And so that's one of the things that you could do. And I think because of my passion for education, that's probably one of the things that I'm more passionate about. The other piece is, as I shared to Linda when I first came on, is this piece on critical race theory. And what I said to Linda, and I had a conversation yesterday with someone, and I said to them that this is not going to happen because of politically in our schools. But it's very important that our children understand the history. And I'm saying this, not only the Black history, but I think our other children need to learn not only the history, but they need to learn the cultures of other children as well. And so who's going to teach this? How can we do this? How can we make this happen? It's going to be left on us to do it. And so that's another piece that I think that you all can look into. How can we do this and make sure that our young children that are coming up today understand not only Black history, but understand the history of other cultures that are living in Charlotte. One of the things 3 years ago, I worked along with WIE and we did a mentoring program at Garinger High School. And at Garinger is one of the most diverse schools in Charlotte culturally, not racially. And I found then that working with those 15 girls from all over the world, I learned so much from them. And so this is another thing that sometimes what happens is we need to learn from from them as well, but not only teaching them, but we need to learn from them as well.
You know, when you talk, you've addressed kind of the access to quality education. The idea of adopting schools, I think, is a great one. The other piece is just making sure people know how to show up where they're doing good versus doing harm. Because I think that when, you know, one of the things the league is known for is training volunteers. So a lot of what you're saying, in my mind, we've got to get really smart about how we equip our members to do certain things. We may be the training arm and then maybe partner with other groups who go into the schools and we provide the individuals for it. So I was just kind of finishing that thought. I mean, does that make sense to you? Because we've got a large membership and not everybody's going to devote time to being a mentor, but they might be able to come in and do specific things, but we've got to almost package it for them.
Right, exactly. And I agree with that, because I think one of the things with the group, and I don't know whether you all remember, but one of the things that we did with the girls at Garinger, the person who worked along with me, Donna Parker Tate, I think she did something with the league in terms of the financial literacy piece for these young girls, because these were 15 girls who came from homes that all of them wanted to go to college, but all of them did not have the means to be able to go to college. So we were working with them to ensure that those 15 girls would go to school and give them the resources that they needed. But at the same time, and not only the resources, but also we culturally, some of those girls had never been downtown Charlotte. We took them to the Alvin Ailey dance. When they were in Charlotte, we took them to that performance. We took them to another Broadway play at Bloomingthal. We took them on a walking tour of downtown Charlotte. You know, those kinds of things. People don't realize things that we do every day. We don't realize that there are a lot of young people in Charlotte who have never had those experiences. So when we talked about taking them on the downtown tour, we asked the question, how many of you have been downtown Charlotte? And only 2 girls raised their hands. So that was for what we do that. We said, okay, everybody's been downtown. But these are kids who are in their communities, but don't get out of their communities, but they need to have that experience as well. We took them to the Met Museum. We took them to the Mecklenburg County Museum of History. So those are the kinds of things that you all can do in terms of working along with others to ensure that young people have those same kinds of experiences that we have. Oh, Sherri, I forgot, we did bring them to Johnson C. Smith on a college tour as well.
And I think you have definitely sent plenty of students to your alma mater, that's for sure.
That's a
Well,
great
I
idea.
really do.
I'm sorry, Sherri. I was gonna say, I really love the idea of the partnering. And, you know, again, the other thing, you guys, league members, now we can say that Dot Counts told us to call these other organizations, so they have to do it. Go ahead, Sherri.
Well, I do know that we appreciate you being here, and we want to certainly respect your time and everyone else's. So thank you for being with us. And I do want to open it up, Spencer, if you can, and see any questions. But this is, you all, we don't have this opportunity often. So this is a living legend. So this is your time to ask her anything. She's made herself available.
I think you should all be able to pop off mute if you want to ask, but if not, just raise your hand and then we can do it for you.
I think you should be able to hop off. And also, if you want to put it in the chat, we can watch that too. If that's another way, if no one wants to speak out loud, but you should be able to unmute yourself.
I know someone's got questions. Don't be scared.
Well, I have a question for you. How has this felt over all of these years? Because like you said, the accolades are always coming. People are always talking with you. How do you see yourself in the grand scheme and the history of all of this?
You know, Sherri, I really don't think of it that way. You know, I've always felt that God put me on this earth to serve. And that's what I have done. And I have tried to do. As I've said, I have, my passion is education, but it does not mean that that's the only passion that I have. I've always felt that I was here to be able to advocate for those who don't have a voice, regardless who they are, where they come from. And I think a lot of that stems back to my parents and my grandparents, especially my dad, because it's something that there were 4 of us, and that's something he taught us, that we always give back. And I have always felt that I've had a wonderful life, and that my purpose in life is to serve. And so that's just who I am. And of course, in my family, you know, they call, now that my parents are deceased, and of course, they call me the matriarch of the family because I'm the one who takes care of everybody, always have, and always will. But that's just who I am as a person.
Dot, your family is special to me because when Will and I first moved to Charlotte, Stephanie and Howard really adopted us. Howard worked at Celanese. My husband was a leader at Celanese, and they just took us under their wing. And I remember the day I made the connection that you were Howard's sister. And y'all, I was fangirling. It was like, you know, I had these women, these Black women in my eyesight, and Dot Counts in her walk, Marion Wright Edelman, these women who were courageous. And again, as a Black woman, you know, those are the sheroes that you call up to keep you on your path. If we don't have any other questions, I don't want to take too much time, but the other question I have, if we don't have any others, Dot, remember after the 50-year anniversary, there was a gentleman that was one of those kids in that crowd, and he reached out to you. That would be an interesting story to share, I think, with the group.
Okay, yes, his name was Woody Cooper, And what happened was after the 50th anniversary, he reached out to the Charlotte Observer and asked if he could get my contact information. And so what they did was they contacted me, and I told them that to give him my email address. He sent me an email, and in that email, he asked for my forgiveness. And I said to him that I forgave him 50 years ago.
Wow.
And as a result of that, he and I became, because what happened was he was in his Sunday school class, and his Sunday school teacher said, "Is there anyone that you would like to ask for forgiveness?" And he said, "Dorothy Counts." And he went on to tell the story that he was in that crowd on September the 4th, 1957. And he wished that he would have done something. But instead, he was following his peers. So when he reached out to me and I read the email, I sat on it for about 24 hours. And the next morning I got up, I responded to him, and I said to him, "I forgave you 50 years ago. But what we can do is, you have children, I have children, you have grandchildren, and I have grandchildren. And what we can do is we can do this together to ensure that what happened to me does not happen to your children, my grandchildren, or any other children." So he and I developed a relationship. We emailed back and forth. And then finally he said, "I think it's time for us to meet face to face." He said, "Let's go out to dinner." And he said, "Where would you like to go?" And I said, "I'd like to go someplace that you could go in 1957, but I could not go." So we chose to go to a restaurant on Moorhead Street. It's called the Open Kitchen. He could go there, but I would have to go around the back to the window if I wanted food. So we met, we went there, his wife Judy came, and another friend of his that was at Harding at the time was in town, and he invited him to come. So our relationship started back and forth. Then we began to do things together. We also spoke at schools to students about forgiveness, the importance of forgiveness. And then in Freedom Park, there is a bench called the Forgiving Bench. And he and I were asked to dedicate that bench in Freedom Park. But at that time, Woody had developed cancer. He was not able to come, but family members came, and that bench was dedicated. And I knew that his health was failing, and I contacted his wife, Judy, and I asked her if I could come and visit him. He was in hospice in Huntersville. And I left work. I worked in the South Park area, and I drove to Huntersville after work. And when I walked in the room, his wife was there, Judy was there, and two of his children. The nurse said to me, "You can talk to him. He's probably not going to respond, but possibly he might hear you." So I sat there and talked to him for about 2 hours. And then when I left, I kissed him on his forehead, and then I walked out of the room. And 2 hours later, Judy called me. He said, "Dot, he was waiting for you because he died after you left." They invited me to come and be a part of his memorial service as a part of their family. And of course I did. So that shows that what happened in 1957, 50 years later, a friendship was developed as a result of that. And he and I used to always talk about the fact that when that happened in 1957, it was a different time for both of us, but it does not necessarily mean that it had to continue to be that way. So we developed a wonderful relationship, and I will never forget Woody Cooper.
So we got a few, Spencer, some questions in the chat. Sherri, do you guys want to try to take those, or?
I was going to say, I'll start at the top. We probably won't be able to get to all of them, unfortunately, but a lot of just praise for that story and how you were able to, forgive, and just the power of forgiveness. So thank you so much for sharing that. One of the questions is, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, about how it's all up to us and our children and our grandchildren to keep fighting it and keep pushing forward. So what would you say to someone who's interested in doing that and advocacy, but they're not really sure where to start yet?
It's always a place where you can start. I mean, I think in terms of when I talked about schools earlier, that's one place you can start. But the other place is you can start within your own home, with your own family, with your own children. Because all of us bring up our children in a different way. And so I think if you start having conversations with your children and share some of the things that I've talked about with them, that's a start. And then as Junior League members, there are a lot of places out here that are a lot of nonprofits now that have started up in Charlotte more so than ever. And they're out working in communities. And so if you can touch base with some of those and find out what can you do? And how can you help, especially during this pandemic time?
I'm going to grab one more question that kind of leads into that too, just with the pandemic and how hard we've seen it be on teachers, school staff, kids themselves. What ways or what should we be telling kids to, really remain optimistic? How can we help them through this and then through the next couple of years too? Because it's going to be hard.
The sad part about it, before I got online with y'all today, I was looking at the national news, and they were talking about, they were giving statistics. 55% of people that are in education today have decided they're going to come out of the field. What's that going to do to our children? And so, and a lot of it is because teachers are just burned out, not only for the pandemic, but a lot of it has to do with what teachers are being paid. And this is what they said. That's another thing you can advocate for. I mean, when the time comes, if especially, and when you think in terms of how many women are in the classrooms with our children, a lot of our teachers are working 2 and 3 jobs. And that's unacceptable. So when you see things on the news about teachers that are fighting, for higher pay and wages, this is something that you can advocate for as well and support them, because as a result of doing that, then you are helping our children. And right now, when we have over 700 teachers out in a day, and we don't have but 350 substitutes that are able to come in, some teachers are handling 2 classes at one time. How can children learn that way? The other is that some children, if they don't have enough teachers, I found out the other day that they're putting the children in the auditorium to sit in the auditorium. That's not learning. So this is another way in terms of how can you help our children. If some of you have some free time, if you think that you could go in, I saw one of our school board members last week, I saw on Facebook where she volunteered and went into one of the schools, and she sat at the front desk and allowed the person at the front desk to go in the classroom. So these are the kinds of things that you all can think in terms of. I know a lot of you are probably working, you don't have time during the day maybe to do that. But if you have an opportunity to say, if I can take 2 hours during the day and go into a school and do something, that means that that's helping our kids. The other thing too is we did something last year, and we did a book backpack drive for 2 of the schools. But not only did we collect school supplies, but we also collected books for those children because they were home. And so in each one of those backpacks, we had age-appropriate books that were given to the children, but we also put in PPE supplies for the children, but also for the parents. Because I have found is that from the principals, that a lot of the children come to school and don't have masks, and it's mandated that they have to wear masks in school. So those are the other kinds of things that's going on right now. And of course, a lot of the parents don't have. You know, I've worked with Atrium, I worked with C.W. Williams Health Clinic to secure cases of masks to be able to donate to the schools so that they can have, at least they can have, the children can have masks when they come in. And one of the principals told me, he said they go through 60 to 100 masks a day because that many children, those children are coming to school without masks. So that's something else that you can think about doing in terms of maybe a project in terms of helping some of the schools in the area in terms of doing that. All of you have resources. Think of your resources. And I tell people, what I do is I have no problem picking up the phone and calling and saying, I need XYZ. What can you donate for me? And so you can do some of the same kinds of things as well.
Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. And so, Spencer, I guess we'll do those last slides. To cap off this great discussion, I am happy to show everyone just another example of how much Ms. Counts-Scoggins means to the history of desegregation in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, the state of North Carolina, and the nation. You know, as Charlotte's West Side continues to grow, develop, and become a very sought after place to live and work, the community has been determined not to let our history be erased by gentrification, or as Dot says, transition. Therefore, when the 5 Points Plaza was being conceived, the City of Charlotte worked with the Arts and Science Council Public Art Commission, and together we commissioned a public art for this plaza that would speak to the community's history. I can say that I am very proud to have been the chair of the Public Art Commission at that time. And in particular, I was the project lead on this particular project. And we worked very hard in 2018, 2019, 2020 with the artist Stacey Utley, with a lot of community engagement on the West Side, asking people, what do you want to see? What should this art be? And this elder, this statesperson for the community, was right there with us, a part of those meetings. She was leading some of those meetings. So in the end, it was only fitting and proper that this community decided that she is the face who should represent our history, along with Johnson C. Smith University, which is in the middle, that's Biddle Hall, the tower, and of course the historic Excelsior Club that is on the West Side. But due to the pandemic and some delays in construction, it took a long time. But as I was sitting in my office this past summer, and Stacey Utley called me up and he said, it's going in, the artwork is going up today, come down here and see. I ran out of my office in the heat. These are photos that I took on my phone that day that it was being installed. And we stood there, I stood there with Stacy, and a tear rolled. And we were just so proud to know how long it took for this to happen. So she continues to be a light in our community, because on the last one at night, and that is a card that came to me for Christmas from the artist for all of the work. But I do want you all to see how those three things come together. And there she is in the center, all lit up, holding it up together. So, Miss Dorothy Counts-Scoggins, thank you so much for all that you have done and all that you continue to do. Lady, you are the epitome of Black girl magic, Black excellence, Black history, and above all, American history. So you keep on keeping on while all of us on this call, while we work to continue your work for diversity, equity, and inclusion across our society. Thank you, lady. Thank you much.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation tonight. I really appreciate it.